This podcast may contain explicit language. I am big. It's the pictures that got small. Sunset Boulevard is next. Welcome to the Greatest Movie of All Time podcast, the show that uses a unique grading style to redefine what the greatest movies are. I'm Tom Duncan.
And I'm Dana Duncan.
And tonight, for our 207th episode, we revisit Sunset Boulevard from 1950, celebrating its 75th anniversary this year. Written and directed by Billy Wilder, with Charles Brackett and D.M. Marshman Jr., cinematography by John F. Seitz, music by Franz Waxman, starring William Holden as Joe Gillis, Gloria Swanson as Norma Desmond, Eric von Stroheim as Max von Mayerling, Nancy Olson as Betty Schaefer, Fred Clark as Sheldrake, Lloyd Goh as Marino, Jack Webb as Artie Green, Cecil B. DeMille as himself, Hedda Hopper as herself, Sidney Skolsky as himself, Buster Keaton as himself, Anna Q. Nilsson as herself, and H.B. Warner as himself. Of course, we can't do this by ourselves, so we bring in, off the bench, one of our great celebrity guests who is returning again with us tonight, the host of Reels of Cinema and co-host of Movies Across the Pod. Please welcome back for his second appearance on the show to date, Frank Mandosa.
Thank you so much for inviting me back. I have been looking forward to this ever since we booked this months ago. It is great to be talking with you guys again. It was such a great time last time, so it's a privilege.
Yeah, we talked Sixth Sense with you about, I would guess, a year ago? Is that, yeah, that sounds about right.
Yep, about that. It was late summer last year.
Yep. And that was awfully a good time. I would recommend anybody go back and listen to that one. I think that was one of our highest rated episodes of last year, not just for the movie's quality, but I think we had a really good discussion for that one. So how have you been since our last episode together?
I've been doing great, thank you. In terms of the podcasting world, it's been sort of a whirlwind year. My previous podcast, the one that I was actually doing when I was on your show last time, Silver Screeners, I actually retired that one in late March, and then about a month later, I rebranded, relaunched, and that's why I now have Reels of Cinema. So I'm back at the beginning when it comes to episode numbers. I think I'm at number 23 at the time of this recording. But it was Silver Screeners. It was time. I had 177 episodes, about 4 years, and it was time to change things up so that I wouldn't get stale. And Movies Across the Pod is still going. We don't record as frequently as my co-host lives in Liverpool, England, so it gets kind of tricky. But we do, on average, about once a month. How about you guys?
Oh, I mean, we've been plugging along. I think we've had episodes just about every week except around Christmas, which is kind of our normal schedule. And this will be, so I mentioned it before, it's our 277th episode. Next week, we will have our 250th different movie on the list.
That's impressive. That is impressive.
I have to give you some kudos because sometimes people just don't know when to end things. And if you thought it was the right time, I mean, that's more than a lot of people can probably say.
I liken it to a TV show that sort of wears out its welcome. You know, I would rather have friends or fellow podcasters turn to me and say, "Oh, you ended that?" as opposed to them saying to me, "Oh, I didn't realize you were still doing that." I didn't want to become The Facts of Life Season 9 or something like that. You know what I mean?
Not to take a side swipe at one of our frequent guests, Scott Cole, but maybe The Simpsons?
Careful.
I know. I shouldn't, but I did. Anyway, so we're here to discuss Sunset Boulevard. By name ID alone, obviously one of the seminal films in the history of Hollywood, is still, as far as a landmark, a significant thing in the history of LA and Hollywood, etc. But why is this film in particular so critically revered?
I think part of it is that it's about Hollywood. Hollywood loves to talk about themselves. Not that they're at all egocentric, sycophantic.
Cultish.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. The other is that I think Billy Wilder is considered one of the greats of all time, and so Hollywood tends to really hold his work up more than any others almost. I think in large part, I mean, John Ford's more revered, but John Ford was kind of a bastard. I think Billy Wilder was much more liked. And so he has a tendency to get a little bit more applause than John Ford does.
To be fair, Billy Wilder was not known to be a easy person to work with either.
Correct. But I think he was kinder to people that were not under his directorial control.
I don't know the historical context to be able to say one way or the other on that front.
I do know that Billy Wilder had initially a great working relationship with Marilyn Monroe around the time they did The 7-Year Itch. That was 1955. 4 years later, they reteamed for Some Like It Hot. To be fair to her, she had a lot going on. She was never fully okay in life. She always, whether it was pill addiction, whether it was dealing with mental illness, whether it was depression, alcoholism, she desperately wanted children. She had 3 marriages and never was able to carry a pregnancy to term. So she had a lot of strikes against her in life. Now, I'm not justifying, or I'm just looking to explain her, where she's coming from, in order to explain why Billy Wilder just got so fed up with her. During Some Like It Hot, she was flubbing lines. She was unreliable in terms of showing up late. Sometimes she would not show up at all. Her husband at the time was Arthur Miller. He would call and say, yeah, she's not going to be here today, so you're going to have to rearrange your shooting schedule last minute, working around her, in other words. She did suffer a miscarriage during the making of the film, so he did finally lose it with her. And the story goes that she was not invited to the wrap party once they finished filming. Whether that was her choice or his command, I don't know. It's never been really confirmed. But she did say that she would work with him again if he would offer her a promise of kindness. And his response was, no, I will never work with her again. So, I mean, I'm trying to present what little I know about both sides of the friction between them, but only they can really answer to that. But where I'm going with this is that I think that he famously was a little, I guess you could say, prickly. I think that if you were reliable and did your job, I think that you were on his good side. If you were not pulling your weight, he really didn't suffer that gladly.
Part of me that I was referring to is I think he has a gigantic ego. I know specifically when we did Double Indemnity, I think season before last, so it might have been 2 years ago, that there was a story that when he lost the Best Picture race for Double Indemnity to Going My Way, that he was on his way to the podium already, thinking he had won, and then got like significantly angry that Leo McCarey won. And so then there was this like big rivalry between 44 and 45 between the two of them. So I'm reflecting it slightly that there's definitely a competitive streak with Wilder. I mean, Wilder by 44, that was like the second or third movie he'd made by that point. So
that's about right.
He didn't have a huge history, and to have that level of ego that he was already one of the best, I think is interesting. But sometimes you have to have those levels of ego to be able to make some great stuff. I mean, Hitchcock certainly was not a man of low ego. John Ford also, of course. So the biggest directors, and I also referenced that I think it was Tarantino had a quote this last week that said, I'm the best director there is, and the second best director is David Fincher, so I'm really glad that he's picking up the project that I'm not willing to direct, because he recognizes my genius. I'm paraphrasing, of course, but...
I quoted Quentin Tarantino on a recent episode of mine, that very statement. You're right. He was saying how glad he was that David Fincher was the one to be taking over the directing reins for the Once Upon a Time follow-up, the Once Upon a Time in Hollywood follow-up that's going to Netflix.
But specifically about Sunset Boulevard, I think that this has always been a critical darling. I think it's also an important year in the history of the Oscars, given what most people see as like a two-horse race between this and All About Eve, which I think for most critics is like a titanic battle between two all-time great films. And so I think because of that race between the two of those films, and both that they represent something about Hollywood, about stardom, about people who are in kind of a decline, and the people that are coming up behind them, that they're somewhat mirror images of each other and have kind of spurred each other on in the history of Hollywood. And so I don't think you can mention one technically without the other. And I should mention that we are doing All About Eve here in the next few weeks, months, something like that. But before the end of the season, we will have covered it as well. In the battle between these two, I've always felt Eve is a little bit better just because this one lands a little bit colder with me than Eve does. But I think most people have kind of their side. They pick one or the other film, and then that's like the better of the two, but they still recognize the other's greatness.
I think what's interesting about both these films is that, for me personally, I have plenty of years in Academy Awards history when I say, oh no, that movie should have won over that one. LA Confidential over Titanic, for example. But 1950, All About Eve versus Sunset Boulevard, this is one of the very few years where I legitimately cannot make up my mind. And every time I do, I then change my mind 5 minutes later. And then 5 minutes later, I go back to the first. It is impossible for me to say which one is the more brilliant. I do think an interesting common link between both films is that it is a depiction of decline in terms of Hollywood status, as you said, but both depictions focus on women in Hollywood. We don't have an actor dealing with being phased out once silent pictures end and sound comes in. We don't have an actor who's on the stage who is scared about losing his career because he has hit that terrible age of 40 years old. So I think it says a lot, too, about the female side of it all in terms of the way that they were used and discarded and easily replaced. It's like the Alanis Morissette song where she says, it was a slap in the face how quickly I was replaced.
One of the common refrains that often is on our friendly cousin podcast of the Revisionist Almanac is how narrow or how shallow the pool of best actress candidates often is, particularly before like the 90s. This is one of the years that I don't think that's true, because you have Ann Baxter, you have Gloria Swanson, you have Bette Davis all competing at the top, and yet none of them wins.
Yeah. It was a weird year.
If there was ever a better example of what was more than likely a split vote, this would be it.
I would have to guess that that's the only plausible explanation I can think of, because everything else, I don't know how you don't award it to one of those three.
I know. I've seen her performance, and I'm drawing a blank as to the winner.
It was Judy Holliday.
Julie Holliday. And it was nothing spectacular or special. I guess it was solid. But everybody picked somebody else, and it was just enough to squeak through.
So some quick background for the movie. Sunset Boulevard was released on August 10th, 1950, making this its 75th anniversary. On a budget of $1.75 million, it is estimated to have grossed $5 million during its initial run, but it did finish outside the top 10 grossing films of the year. Despite that, the film has been a critical darling since the moment of its release, and Sunset Boulevard was nominated for Best Picture, Director for Billy Wilder, Actor for William Holden, Actress for Gloria Swanson, Supporting Actor for Von Stroheim, Supporting Actress for Olsen, Film Editing and Cinematography while winning for Screenplay, Art Direction in Black and White, and Score for Franz Waxman. At the time, its 11 Oscar nominations were exceeded only by the 14 received by All About Eve, which also won 6 awards, winning Best Picture and Best Director. Since its release, Sunset Boulevard has often been cited as one of the greatest films ever made. AFI has recognized it on the following lists. Number 12 on the original AFI's 100 Years, 100 Movies from 1998. AFI's 100 Years, 100 Movie Quotes in 2005 had both All Right, Mr. DeMille, I'm Ready for My Close-Up, and I Am Big, It's the Pictures That Got Small, at number 7 and number 24, respectively. In 2005, for AFI's 100 Years of Film Scores, it was number 16. And for the anniversary edition, after 10 years in 2007 of AFI's 100 Years, 100 Movies, it also finished at number 16. The Village Voice ranked the film at number 43 in its top 250 best films of the century list in 1999, based on a poll of critics. The film was included in the New York Times' guide to the best 1,000 movies ever made in 2002. In January 2002, the film was voted at number 87 on the list of the top 100 essential films of all time by the National Society of Film Critics. Sunset Boulevard received 33 votes in the British Film Institute's 2012 Sight and Sound polls, making it the 63rd greatest film of all time in the critics' poll, and 67th in the directors' poll that year. In the earlier 2002 Sight and Sound polls, the film ranked 12th among directors. The Writers Guild of America ranked the film's screenplay the 7th greatest ever. In a 2015 poll by BBC Culture, film critics ranked Sunset Boulevard the 54th greatest American film of all time. Sunset Boulevard was inducted into the Library of Congress in 1989 as one of the charter members of the National Film Registry. Sunset Boulevard currently holds a 98% among critics on Rotten Tomatoes, a 94 score on Metacritic, and a 4.4 out of 5 on Letterboxd. So, Dad, what is your relationship to this film?
This is one of these films that I always wanted to see, and I did not see until later on. I think I first saw this film about 15 years ago. I can't remember. It just happened to be on like Turner Classic or something like that, and I was able to finally see it. And then I've watched it for the show. I've watched it, I think, at least one, if not twice, other than for the show. So I think it's about the 5th time I've seen it. But I did not see it until much later.
So, just for reference sake, if you want to go back and listen to our original episode, since this is a revisit episode, it came out exactly 4 years ago, basically the same week. It was released on September 8th, 2021, and this will be coming out on September 3rd, 2021. So almost 4 years to the exact date. And you can check our math on what our relationships were and compare them against what we think they are now and how good our memory is 4 years later, of course. But I believe I watched this for the first time probably somewhere in the range of like 2019, 2020, as I was crossing films off of the top 100 list for the AFI. Obviously, this is a high-ranking film, and so it was going to get some level of high priority as I started to become much more serious about movies in general during that decade. So it was sometime in there. I think the second time I watched it was for the show. I think I've watched it a third time somewhere in between there, and I think this might be my 4th time watching the film. And I think my rating has generally stayed between, they use the 5-star rating on Letterboxd. It's been somewhere between a 4 and a 4.5 just about every time. I know there are a lot of people that think this is a full 5-star movie. As I said before, this leaves me just a little bit colder, a little more inaccessible comparative to some other Wilder films that I appreciate a little bit more. But by the same token, it's always stacked against Eve. And I've had such a reverence since the first time that I saw Eve that maybe subconsciously I'm trying to push this one down to keep that one up. And that's possible.
I think part of the problem with this film is that neither character is that likable of the two main characters.
I mean, yes, it's definitely an anti-hero part of it, but they are sympathetic, even if they're not good people.
Yes, I understand the sympathy, but is it best to be sympathetic or empathetic?
Fair point. Frank, what's your relationship to the movie?
I have to admit that I have seen this movie for real probably about 15 or 20 times. And the reason why is because I use it often in the film class that I teach, and I've been teaching this course now for about 15 years. I also taught a summer film class where I've used it before. So I've sat through it many, many times. I can probably recite certain scenes verbatim. Not the entire film, but certain scenes. I will say that I've always found this film to be visually very brilliant. The acting is, for me, impeccable. I do remember that the very first time I saw it was for a film class that I was taking. This would have been probably around 2005. And I remember saying to the professor, the following class, Gloria Swanson was good, yes, but she was really, really over the top. I found it very distracting. That was my initial impression. And he said what you just said. He said, fair enough, he said, but that's kind of the point as well, because that's the way she lives her life. To her, everything is a performance. She does not know how to be an authentic person. Everything has to be this big show, the bells and whistles and exaggeration, because as she says in the film at the very end, this is my life. This is my life. This is right before she says, I'm ready for my close-up. So if this is all she has, she's gone through several marriages, no children. What is her life? Her life is staying in that mansion every single day and answering, or at least receiving and reading fan mail that, I don't know, is a spoiler okay, or should I not?
Go ahead. I mean, this
That's
movie
all right.
is 75 years old.
Okay. I didn't want to assume. I just want to make sure. I didn't want to say anything and then to have you say, wait, flag in the play. Okay. So when it turns out that it's Max who has been sending her all these fan letters, her response, that's a lie. She doesn't believe it. Her entire life is based around performance. So when the professor said, yeah, she is over the top, but that's the way Norma Desmond is supposed to be, then I went back and I revisited it and I said, yeah, I kind of see that now. I didn't get it on the first viewing. And then subsequently, I began using it in my film class every semester. I alternate between Sunset Boulevard and Singing in the Rain, to be honest. But Sunset Boulevard I've used probably not as often, but every time I do use it, the class usually really gets involved in it. They usually, I don't want to use the word hate, but I will say that they usually do not root for Norma. And they find Joe Gillis to be entertaining because he is, in the words of one student, I enjoyed watching him because he was such a loser. and I said, okay, wow, explain please. Take that further. Say more. And he said, well, for one thing, he is kissing the fiance of his best friend who did nothing to him. Secondly, he is living with this woman and he is taking her for everything that she's worth. And third, he's a hack. He's not even a good writer. He can't sell a screenplay. He wrote Bases Loaded and the studios were just not interested in it at all. And even Betty Schaefer, who at the time was a lowly script reader, she wasn't an executive. Here she is. She reads it and she says, I found it lacking something. I think films should say a little something. And this one just didn't seem to have any substance in my eyes, she says. So he was not, Joe Gillis is usually someone that they enjoy watching because they enjoy watching him. They enjoy watching his downfall as a result of all of the very misguided choices that he makes throughout the film. So my relationship to this film is one that I've taught as well as one that I've had taught to me.
The Jerry Springer effect.
Yeah. That's actually a very good analogy.
So, Dad, do you like the film?
Yes, I love the film. I loved it the first time I saw it, and I love it ever since.
Do you have a plot summary ready for us?
I do. Sunset Boulevard is a dark Hollywood drama directed by Billy Wilder. The story follows Joe Gillis, William Holden, a struggling screenwriter who can't sell his scripts. By chance, he meets Norma Desmond, Gloria Swanson, a once famous silent film actress who now lives in isolation in her decaying mansion on Sunset Boulevard. Norma dreams of making a comeback and convinces Joe to help rewrite a script she believes will return her to stardom. As Joe becomes financially dependent on Norma, he finds himself trapped in her world of fading glory and denial. Their relationship grows tense and unhealthy, especially as Joe develops feelings for another young writer. Norma's desperation and inability to accept reality leads to a shocking and tragic ending. The film is a powerful look at obsession, fame, and the dark side of Hollywood.
Thank you, Dad. So what is the film about?
Well, the easy part is it's about Hollywood and how we treat stars who are no longer in the limelight.
I think it's also about how we treat them when they are in the limelight, but even when their glimmer seems to fade even slightly, that we cast them aside and replace them.
Well, that's just not only in Hollywood, but in society as well. It's like we go out of our way to build stars up and then to tear them down once they're big.
I think a lot of American culture is built on building up heroes, tearing them down, and then reclaiming them or building them back. I mean, we've done that with how many numerous sports stars, celebrities, political figures, etc. I mean, we could go through a very long list of people that we have built up, torn down, and built up again. Or maybe multiple times.
If I could add one thing, I think that society, for whatever reason, also tends to be very selective with who we allow to have a return. I can give you an example. Hugh Grant, 30 years ago, he was caught with a prostitute. His career now is thriving. He's been, quote unquote, forgiven by the public. Robert Downey Jr., he had drug problems. He was in rehab. He became combative on set. Now here he is, an Academy Award winner. He, of course, really skyrocketed with a return when he became Iron Man in the MCU. But then you have other celebrities who just, for whatever reason, never seem to be allowed to forget any past transgressions. I think a good example of that would be Paul Rubens, Pee Wee Herman. You know, after the scandal, he never really fully recovered. He had several attempts at comebacks, but he never really had his career never really regained its momentum.
I'll throw out somebody else as well that I think is an interesting example where they were huge, then they decline. And then they were huge, and then they decline. And they've kind of gone through this cyclical nature. Ben Affleck. I mean, he had that huge rise to stardom after Good Will Hunting and Armageddon and all of this other stuff. And within a short period of time, like, he's one of the great leading men. And then he started to have some bombs. His relationships and all of the publicity that he got went sideways. He receded within himself for quite a while. He comes back as a director and then starts to make a new brand for himself, only to hit the mountaintop about the time when he wins for Argo, although he doesn't win Best Director, but he wins Producer, so he does get another Oscar. And Gone Girl is probably the end of that era right before Batman hits, and it just kind of goes right back downhill. And he's kind of around yet, and he's doing like Dunkin' Donuts commercials, and he's still a celebrity and doing other random things. So it's not like he's hard up in any way, but it's not. When we thought he was winning director awards, we thought he was going to be the new It director, and he just has not been there for the last 10 years with anything that I thought was anywhere on par with what he was doing with like The Town and Gone Baby Gone and etc.
Well, the classic one is John Travolta. That guy's had more careers than you can count.
Well, one of these years we'll make you watch Gotti.
That's okay. Thank you.
All right. Is this Billy Wilder's best film? I know it for some people it's like picking Beatles songs. I think it's a slightly easier task than that, but
no, I'll always have a stronger proclivity towards Double Indemnity because
that's
that was
where my
first
mind
Billy
goes as well.
That's my first Billy Wilder film. I saw when I was a freshman in college. It happened to come on Eugene and Chicago. I didn't have class on Mondays until 8 o'clock at night. And so I would sit in the dorm room by myself because everybody else was gone and watch TV. And I watched this film or watched Double Indemnity, and I was just mesmerized.
I will also throw out, I know we discussed The Apartment earlier this year, and that would probably get my mother's vote for best Billy Wilder film, but I'll throw out a one that's made quite an impression on me that we're also going to be discussing later this year in November with Kieran, and that is Lost Weekend, which did win the Best Picture Oscar in 1945, or for the year 1945.
Not to sound overly trendy or sound like I'm jumping on any sort of a bandwagon, because I know there's a huge fan base out there, but I keep coming back to Some Like It Hot. And I know that it's usually revered as one of the best, one of the funniest comedies ever made. And I would say that that film really captured lightning in a bottle. You have the perfect chemistry with the cast, Jack Lemmon in top form, Marilyn Monroe had never been better. They both won Golden Globes, and Jack Lemmon was nominated for the Oscar. Tony Curtis, he had his moments. I think Jack Lemmon was a bit more, I would say that Jack Lemmon was a bit looser than Tony Curtis was. Tony Curtis was used to being the matinee idol, and Jack Lemmon had already won an Oscar. He had already previously played these goofballs, these eccentric characters, and he built a career of playing a lot of high-strung, neurotic types that he began with Some Like It Hot. Of course, we have that in The Odd Couple. We have that in The Out of Towners. He just that type of character that became his bread and butter.
My favorite's the Fortune Cookie,
which got Walter Matthau the Oscar. Yep. Yeah, Billy Wilder really knew how to get the best that was inside each of his actors. I also think that he placed a lot of value, as any director should, on what was on the page. You have to start with a good script, a good screenplay, a good story. You have to have well-developed characters, even if it's a comedy like Some Like It Hot. I just think that Some Like It Hot is the entertaining movie to watch. Double Indemnity is brilliant. I love film noir. It's one of my favorite genres. The Apartment, I do appreciate everything that it has to offer. Jack Lemmon and Shirley MacLaine, they did great together. It became a Broadway musical called Promises, Promises a few years after that. So going back to Sunset Boulevard, I would word it this way. I would say that Sunset Boulevard is one of his best, if not the best. I would say it's one of his best, because I would probably put Sunset Boulevard and Double Indemnity up on top as well.
The one thing I can say about Wilder is that he has a knack for figuring out which actors can play certain parts. Fred MacMurray always playing the likable but yet sleazy guy. Jack Lemmon, the neurotic. And with Holden, he picked him because he has this ability to always be kind of a wisecracking smartass.
Did you know? When Gloria Swanson finished Norma's final scene, the mad staircase descent, she burst into tears and the crew applauded. Even though it wasn't the last scene filmed, Billy Wilder threw a party for her as soon as the shot was finished. Did you know? When Norma Desmond says to the guard at the Paramount Studio gates, "Without me, there wouldn't be any Paramount Studio," the words could actually apply to Gloria Swanson herself, as she was the studio's top star for 6 years running. Did you know? The character of Norma Desmond is modeled on the fate of several leading actresses of the silent era. Mary Pickford lived in seclusion, away from the public eye, while both Mae Murray and Clara Bow had well-documented struggles with mental illness. Did you know? For the first industry screening, Paramount executives invited several silent film stars. At the end, they stood and cheered for Gloria Swanson's return. Did you know? Billy Wilder went into production with only 61 pages of script finished, so he had to shoot more or less in chronological order. This was a first for Gloria Swanson, but proved a big boon in helping her develop the character's descent into madness. Did you know? The name Norma Desmond was a combination of silent film star Norma Talmadge and silent movie director William Desmond Taylor, whose Still Unsolved Murders is one of the great scandals of Hollywood history. On the morning of February 1, 1922, Taylor, who had been romantically involved with Talmadge, was shot and killed in his Hollywood bungalow. His killer was never identified. Did you know? Cinematographer John F. Seitz would sprinkle dust into the air so it could be caught by the lights and create a moody effect. He had used a similar technique on Double Indemnity. Cecil B. DeMille agreed to do his cameo for a $10,000 fee and a brand new Cadillac. When Billy Wilder went back to him later to secure a close-up, DeMille charged him another $10,000. And with that, we will take our first break, and we will be right back. Before we jump back into the episode, next week for our 278th episode, we welcome back Jesse Sertle of Cinemadison to discuss Almost Famous from 2000, celebrating its 25th anniversary. Written and directed by Cameron Crowe, cinematography by John Toll, music by Nancy Wilson, starring Patrick Fugit, Billy Crudup, Frances McDormand, Kate Hudson, Jason Lee, Anna Paquin, and Philip Seymour Hoffman. You won't want to miss that one, so watch ahead of the show by searching the Real Good app to find where it's streaming for you. That's REELGOOD. And before we move too much further into the episode, Frank, where can people find you and what have you been working on?
Oh, thank you very much. So, Reels of Cinema. That's what I've been working on, to be honest. It's still a relatively new show. As I mentioned before, I'm in probably the range of episode 22, 23. So, it's finding its voice. My next episode is going to be sort of a back-to-school special. I'll be doing Rodney Dangerfield's Back to School, and I'll be doing Melissa McCarthy's Life of the Party, which was 2018. So the show is structured similarly to my previous one, to Silver Screeners, in that I have 2 films per episode that are somehow linked. They share a common theme or a common actor, maybe a common director. So that's my next episode. The most recent one that I just put out is a Brian De Palma twofer. I had a guest on. His name is Fred. And we talked about 1972's Sisters and 1980's Dressed to Kill with Michael Caine and Angie Dickinson and Nancy Allen. So that's where I am right now with Reels of Cinema. I'm hoping that it becomes at least a modest success. So far, so good. I'm still going. So it's enough to keep me motivated.
You're speaking of back to school, and I still laugh every time I think of he hires Kurt Vonnegut to write a paper for his college class on Fahrenheit, and he gets an F because he doesn't understand it. It's like every college English professor I had. They knew more than the author.
Back to School, famously filmed at the University of Wisconsin, which is 10 minutes from me by drive.
Well, I do have one fun fact about it. The final scene where he's taking his oral final exams, when he's in that room with all the professors, that was the exact same room that Jennifer Beals danced in when they filmed Flashdance, the climactic her audition at the end of the film. So that iconic scene where she's dancing to Flashdance, What a Feeling, that was the exact same room where several years later they filmed Back to School and he was taking his exams.
Would have been interesting to see Rodney at Flashdance.
Okay, that's a visual.
And Frank, do you have any socials out there for anybody that would like to look you up?
Thank you. Yes, I'm on Facebook. I have a public Facebook film group called Reels of Cinema, which is the same name as my solo podcast. You can also find me on X/Twitter at FilmBuff1974. That's FILMBUFF 1974. You can also find me on Instagram and Threads at Frank Mandosa 1974. And you can also email me at reelsofcinemapod@gmail.com. I do have a monthly email newsletter, a movie newsletter that I put out. Everyone is BCC'd, so everyone's emails remain safely unseen by everybody else. And it's full of movie-related content, including but not limited to that month's upcoming releases in theaters and on streaming, a list of celebrity birthdays of that particular month, list of my upcoming film-related speaking engagements, some in person, some virtual, some both, links to previous podcast episodes, both of them, Reels of Cinema and Movies Across the Pod. I have a recommended movie of the month. I do have a section where it's in memoriam, any famous actors who passed away in the past month. So I enjoy putting it together. It's free. It's simply me putting together this email. There are no ads, no product placements, just hopefully fun movie-related content. So if you'd like to be added to the email distribution list, simply shoot me an email at reelsofcinemapod@gmail.com.
Now, moving on to the big announcement. You can imagine the imaging that we would have if we were a much more professional podcast where we had sound effects and like horns and... Sure, let's do that. Anyway, but yes, we teased this at the end of last week. We've been technically teasing it all summer. So let's take you through a rough idea of what exactly happened. On a work trip from New Mexico, because in my employer's great wisdom, they decided to drive to New Mexico from Wisconsin instead of flying. Anyway, we're stuck in a car and we're talking about movies, as Dana and I want to do on many occasions. If it's not sports, it's usually movies. And we're once again spouting off about how the Sight and Sound poll is really just for critics who are up their own ass. And so it was our thought that, critics have this one ideal of what a movie is and should do and what is art, etc. But maybe like podcasters, people who somewhat straddle the line between critic and just general fan, the people who are amateurs trying to do this and take both sides of that conversation, the casual fan and the more critical eye, and put those together and see if we could come up with a better list. So we put together a invitation-only group of podcasters. Frank is involved. Other people that are involved, and I will name drop you all here individually, and this has nothing to do with when you joined or anything else, just the names that I wrote down as I got through them. We have Andrew Corns of the Revisionist Almanac, Heather Stewart, the Question Queen, Sarah Shea of Shea Cinema, Peterson W. Hill, who's a 10-time club member on our show, also a co-host over at War Starts at Midnight, Pierre Dubois, who is a commenter extraordinaire on Twitter and Instagram and such, Jylan Salah-Salman, who's been on our show a bunch of times, Kristen Battistello, who was on our Ben-Hur episode. They're both over at In Session Film, but they have a bunch of other tags and other things that you can find. We'll have a bunch of posts going up with this announcement video. Amanda Netherington over at Oscar Upsets, Aisha Khan at Every Sci-Fi Film, Ryan Luis Rodriguez, who's been a multiple-time guest on our show and will be coming back next year from the One Track Mind podcast, Brian Scuttle from Sonic Cinema and his podcast over there. We have Damon Carter from the Never Ending Watch List over across the pond. We have Morgan Phillips Pete, who is on Instagram as Lone Wolf Mojo and also runs the YouTube channel Hall of Film. We've got Frankie Sparks and Scott Eisenberg from Shoot the Flick that were on for our Elmer Gantry episode earlier this year. We have Adam Freed from Movie Archer and Chase Skaken over at Real Rate on Instagram as well. So these are just a few of the names that are included. We had some people who did not want to be disclosed for conditions of anonymity, and that's perfectly fine. But essentially, we have a list of, I think we're expecting over 30 of these people to return from our original list of about 53, all of their ballots, and we will be putting this all together to try and come up with what we think is a more refined list. Now, for full disclosure of what goes into the list, all of these people will be providing us a rankings of their top 50 best films. Now, the Sight and Sound poll only asks you for your top 10. So we think that will also provide some level of nuance beyond what the Sight and Sound poll does. But also, depending on where you rank a film, will also include points. And so the points inverted ranking system will also overweight. So if you have, let's say, Back to the Future at number 1, it's awarded points. If you have a film inside the top 10, it gets awarded bonus points. So essentially that way we give a little bit more points to people's higher ranking movies than their lower ones. And so it's not just that the film was included across everybody's list. So it's not the most often mentioned film will finish at the number one on our list, but rather we want to have films that we think are higher up in people's estimation of what are the best films, and thus hopefully have a more nuanced and fair list that will be more accurate to what the opinions across a lot of different cinepodcasters is going to be. Dad, anything to add?
No, I think you covered just about all of it. I think that it will, the Sight and Sound poll, as we talked about, because it just gives you ranking based upon the number of times you appeared in people's lists. I don't think that really does a justification for the ranking. And it makes people actually sit down. I mean, it's going to make a difference because we're giving a little bit more points to the top 10 of your ranking than the remaining 40. So it's going to really challenge people to think seriously about what is in their top 10 versus what is number 11 or 12. It's also going to give more weight because some people are going to have some films very high up on the list. Some people may not have them at all. One I think that we're talking or been flashing around about is Back to the Future, which some people have way up high and some people have at the bottom. And I have a feeling that this is going to ultimately kind of average out and actually do a better job overall of addressing and assessing the best film. We have a criteria. We will be publishing it or making it available as we get through this. We're going to be doing a whole series of reveals. We'll start with the very end and do several of the bottom films at one time. And these will be done weekly leading up to the final portion, which will be more individualized until we get to the ultimate conclusion, which I believe we're going to be doing the win in December.
So you're a little bit ahead of me on how we're going to do some of the releases for this yet, just because we haven't combined everything. We haven't received everyone's lists. Notably, you and I have not turned in either of our lists yet. The due date is technically 2 days prior to when this episode comes out, but this is recorded usually 1 week in advance. So we're waiting up until the last second. And I know that human nature is often that you have a deadline and people wait until the last second to turn something in. We have secured quite a number of lists so far to this point, but depending on how many different movies are represented will ultimately set how many films we're going to disclose are on the list and how long this list may or may not be. We may cut it off at an artificial point and go from there, but it's also just dependent on what the scores are, essentially. Because if you're mentioned one time as like the 43rd film on somebody's list and you're never mentioned again in the 30 plus list we may get, I don't know if we need to release every film that appeared on the list. That being said, like Dana mentioned, we will be having weekly drops of what the list is up until we get to Christmas Eve, which will be our last episode of the season. That will be the reveal of the number one film of all time. Excuse me. That will be the reveal of the best film on this Cinema Legacy poll, which is what the name of this will be, or this project that we have going on. And then that will continue forward into the future at that point. Just basically stay tuned. The easiest place to find what is on the list is going to be embedded in our weekly Gmode episodes every Wednesday on those releases, but we will be having some graphics up as we slowly go through, so you can definitely find information on our socials as we go forward at Gmode Podcast as well. We are hoping that this is not a one-off. This is not one edition of the list and then we just don't return to it. We are very hopeful. We're not sure when, but that we will repeat this specific project of the best films list, an overall list, but we may next year do either a genre list or a decades list or something else where we just change it up a little bit and make people narrow in their focus a little bit more than just a great overall list that spans 100 years worth of Hollywood and film and etc. So we're very excited about this project. We're very excited to release the results to you as we get them. Like I said, right now in where we're recording this, it's a week before this video and this episode are about to release. The deadline for submissions for people is on September 1st. So we will start slowly gathering these. And I think our first drop will likely be on the week after this comes out. So this comes out on September 3rd. Our first drop of releases, or what is actually on the list, is going to be September 10th. So you can slowly find out, and we'll just have these weekly updated as we go along until we reach Christmas. But if you have any questions, you have any comments, anything like that, you can certainly talk to any of our great esteemed people that I've already mentioned, particularly the people I would like to thank as part of this project that have been helping to be the guides on it, the organizers, the people that have really helped spur this along. Andrew Corns, of course. Heather Stewart has been in the background. She will be part of our data tabulation team, and she's enlisted a 12-year-old that is really excited to help us with some of that.
Yeah.
It's not child labor. It's not what you think. And then Sarah Shea, also from Shea Cinema. All three of them have been helping organize this behind the scenes and get us squared away so that we can bring this to you hopefully very, very, very soon. So, all right. Again, any questions, you can certainly direct it to us. There is basically just anything tied with Gmode, since we are releasing it through our particular platform, that will go to the overall Cinema Legacy poll, and any questions or comments that you have from that, you can certainly leave comments there. Okay, let's get back into Sunset Boulevard. If you have not been with us before for a revisit episode, we skip the normal second section of our show in favor of revisiting the categories to see if we were right or wrong on the last time that we did this film. So, with winding back the clock 4 years almost exactly to the date, we will be discussing each of these 6 categories that we have for the Stanley Rubric, and we will start, as we always do, with Legacy. Now, 4 years ago, the Legacy score on this one was a 7.25. Dad, did we get this right or wrong?
We almost got it right. I personally think that we just were a tad low. So I will go first. I had for industry 4.5. I think that the number of Academy Award nominations and the wins, as well as its long consideration as far as being on multiple best films, it's considered in the pantheon of Wilder films, deserves a 4.5. It's revered yet to this day. The public, I think, is a 3. Among cinephiles, it is well received and well seen and considered, but for the general public, the mass, it's not. So I can't go any higher than 3. So I'm at a 7.5, which is 0.5 less or more than what I had, or we had.
No, that's 0.25. That's why I do the math. Anyway, I have a 9 here. It is an easy industry 5. I don't think there's really any debate about that. And as far as my standards on what receives a 4, I roughly have it. If basically you can assume that every cinephile has seen this, and you can assume that some general members of the public have seen this, and it has a certain level of name ID behind it, I think it's a pretty good case for a 4, which even when you ran the half-assed poll this week, because we didn't have an staff meeting in the traditional sense, since you're on vacation, which is why your background is very different than it normally is. You're in a cabin in the middle of nowhere, Wisconsin. That's not an actual location name. That's just, yeah, you understand what I mean. Regardless, I still have this at a 9.
I would have to say that taking into consideration the quality of the acting, the quality of the writing, the production design, the cinematography, the editing, the musical score, I would say the costumes, I would say that all of it was top notch. If I had to deduct any points for anything, this is probably picking at nits, but I would say that the story might have not suffered if the running time of the film were trimmed a little bit just to improve the pacing. But again, I can't think of any scene that I would say is extraneous, to be honest with you. I think everything that they have in the final cut leads up well to all of the significant moments. The meeting of Norma, for example, when she's burying her monkey. So I can only half-heartedly say that I would deduct points for the pacing. If I had to find anything else as charming and as likable and as relatable as Nancy Olsen is in her portrayal of Betty Schaefer, if I had to pick a weak link in the cast, I would probably point to her and say that her performance could have been a little stronger, but I have to cut her some slack. It was one of her, if not her most significant, it was a debut performance, at least for a role that big. And her character is meant to be that, you can't say submissive. I would say she is more, I don't know, she's very happy, she's very positive, she's very optimistic. You might say she lives in a bubble, but she also speaks her mind. So you can't really say that she's submissive. She tells it like it is when it comes to her first perception of that script, Bases Loaded, which went nowhere. So if I have to pull together all of those factors, I would probably, in aggregate, would say that Sunset Boulevard gets out of 10. I would give it a 9.
Okay, so we have 2 9s, and we have one weird holdout at a 7.5. All right, now, if you have not been with us for about the past 2-ish years, we started doing negotiations on each of these scores. So the fact that I have a backup in my 9 is helpful here.
All right.
I would say that there is no middle point in this discussion since we're 1.5 points apart and we have 2 9s. The median point would be an 8.5 if you're really going to stress that you can't go up because of cinephiles.
I'll go with the 9, but cut me some slack someplace else in this list.
All right. If you want to hold your wild card in reserve, but then that's a 9.
Wouldn't that be a wilder card?
It could be. It very well could be. All right, then we move to impact and significance. Now, legacy is often a score of how the legacy of the film is perceived for the audience and the industry as a whole, approximately 5 years after it came out until today. So 1955 to today, that's what we were debating on in legacy. Impact and significance takes those initial 5 years, and that's what we're working on. But again, we split the category between industry and audience, 5 and 5 points apiece for a total of 10. Originally on this one, we had a 6.75. I think we got this wrong. I think that even in the moment, with how celebrated the film was, that it was only second in total nominations at the time that it came out to its contemporary in All About Eve, I think says a lot for it. I think at this moment in time, this basically got Wilder carte blanche to do whatever he wanted if he didn't already have it to this point. But this is the movie where, because there's kind of a lost period between The Lost Weekend and Sunset Boulevard where most, if any, of his films during that 5-year period just are kind of forgotten. But after this, he goes on to do An Ace in the Hole, where that's kind of a wild swing for him. He does Sabrina, he does 7-Year Itch. He's doing, I mean, he has a lot of good films. Stalag 17, another film we've discussed on here. Some Like It Hot, The Apartment. He's got Witness for the Prosecution in here. He's got a great 50s run in here. So from that standpoint, and you want to say that William Holden goes on to a pretty good career after this. He ends up winning an Oscar for a different Billy Wilder film in Stalag 17 a couple of years later. I think that the industry score on this one is pretty high. So I'm going to screw it. I'm going to go with a 5 there. And then as far as an audience perspective, I think this was always a little bit more revered among Hollywood elite and critics, but I'm not sure it appealed to the average person in the same way. And so I can't give it a full 10 with a 5 here on the audience side of it. I'm going to go with a 3.5 there for an 8.5.
I think that one thing that has helped this with the staying power of the film is the fact that Andrew Lloyd Webber did turn it into a musical, which was a very successful musical, got Glenn Close the Tony Award, and debuted in the early 90s and really has been running somewhere in the world ever since, whether it's through regional theater or actual Broadway revivals. It's not the movie, of course, but it's based on the movie. And I think that has helped to keep the film in the public consciousness more so than All About Eve has. All About Eve was turned into a musical called Applause with Lauren Bacall in 1970, but that was 55 years ago. So I think with Sunset Boulevard as one of the musicals that's currently in the zeitgeist, I think that has helped in terms of keeping this 1950 film alive. I also think what helps is that her quote, "I'm ready for my close-up, Mr. DeMille," has been parodied everywhere. The Muppets did it. Countless sitcoms have done it. You hear that line all the time. You hear it in other stage musicals. It's just become sort of the go-to anytime you're having a character who is supposed to be high in themselves or aspiring for stardom or greatness. I think Fame, the movie Fame, even used the line, if I'm not mistaken, at one point. One of the characters did. So I would say I would give the audience, I would probably give it a 4. And as far as the industry, I think that as Dana, as you said at the beginning, Hollywood loves stories about Hollywood. Those movies tend to do well. Sunset Boulevard, Singing in the Rain, in recent years, La La Land, Mulholland Drive. Movies about Hollywood tend to be looked at with a very receptive eye. So in aggregate, I would give Sunset Boulevard here an 8.5.
So 2 8.5s on the board, Dad.
I'm at a 5 for the industry and a 4 for the public. So I'm at a 9. I think the industry loved this film. I think the Academy loved this film. That's why it got the nominations, got the awards. I don't think that the public didn't like the film as much because, I mean, it did make, I believe it grossed $5 million on a $1.5 million budget. It was not in the top. All About Eve outdid it in the box office by a considerable amount from what I could tell. But then again, that time frame, how they calculated that was unclear sometimes. I suppose I could go to the 8.5 for consistency. But I think I would go down on the public to the 3.5 to make it the 8.5 overall.
And that's precisely what I did, essentially. So then you'd have a mirror score to mine. So that's an 8.5 then average. Well, I guess it's not an average, but an 8.5 score between the three of us. We moved from a 6.75 on that originally to an 8.5. Now, on Novelty, this is a calculation that we have only started in this season to tabulate just a bit differently. This is anything for the originality having to do with the film for 5 points and 5 points for the execution of the film. Originally, we gave this one a 10. I think that has to do much more with the originality, which is what this category used to be about. But I really don't see a reason to move off of that. I think the execution is relatively high. I have no issues with visually how it works, with the script or the story. I mean, if there's anybody, and I've mentioned that I find this movie to be a little bit cold and I can't connect with it as much, that would have some nitpicks on this one, it would probably be me. But just based on the originality of the idea, even though in the moment it's had a contemporary that was kind of talking about the same things, but I don't think there was really anything like this at the moment that it came out. And frankly, burying her monkey should be a euphemism, but it's not. So I'm okay with the 10.
I will agree. The originality was a clear 10 back, when when we were doing this. Now we're doing the execution as well. And I have no problems with the execution. I think it's brilliantly done. So I'm ready to give it the same.
All right, Frank.
Gonna make it easy. I agree completely. I give it a 10 because I don't think that there was a film that depicted Hollywood in such a negative light at that point in time. There had been films about Hollywood previously. There had been the original Star is Born, for example. There had been A Double Life, so with Ronald Colman. So it's not as if movies about Hollywood had not yet been made. But Sunset Boulevard took that idea and really, really just mercilessly cut the legs off of the Hollywood elite, Hollywood executives. They were depicted in negative light. For example, the studio executive who bemoans the fact that he had turned down Gone with the Wind, saying that nobody would see a Civil War picture. So they're depicted as, out of touch with audience preferences. So definitely a 10 for me.
All right. So that makes it pretty simple then. As we move into our second break, we moved from a 7.25 on Legacy to a 9, from a 6.75 on Impact and Significance to an 8.5, and from an original score of 10 on Novelty, we moved not at all. So we will take our second break, and we will be right back. Before we jump back into the episode, and before we get to the Stanley rubric in a minute, if you're ever curious about our Master Greatest Movies of All Time list that has every graded movie we've ever discussed on the show, there's a link in the episode description of every episode of this show, or you can go to RonnieDuncanStudios.com and find it as the top entry on the Greatest Movie of All Time podcast show page. That is the grades we've done so far for all 249 movies we've graded, and we continue to add more each week. Make sure to check that out as we go and follow along. Dad, do we have anyone to remember this week?
Yes. Jerry Adler, 96. American actor. Was in The Sopranos, Rescue Me, and The Good Wife.
So for anybody that either needs a picture, you can certainly go look it up, but I'll try and save you. If you're a fan of The Sopranos, he was, I think it was Hench is the character name, but he was the older Jewish advisor that Tony Soprano's dad relied on. Then he went to for advice on a lot of things. He was a record producer at one time. Great character throughout the course of the series. Wonderful actor. You saw him pop up in a lot of different TV shows. I think he developed into an acting career later in life because I don't remember seeing him when he was younger. Certainly somebody that if you were a fond fan of The Sopranos, definitely you know exactly who this is if you look up a picture. I would guarantee you know who this is. And so we remember him here fondly with a moment of silence in his honor. Thank you. All right, we left off at classicness, which is often our most nuanced category. Now, there isn't one great definition of classicness. It's mostly, was this ahead of its time? Has it aged well? Has it aged poorly? Are there some extenuating circumstances or factors? I mind you, when we discussed The Usual Suspects a couple of weeks ago, this got quite nuanced, to say the least. And I only say that because that was one of our highest rated episodes of the season already. And so normally I let Dad lead off in this category. Originally, 4 years ago when we did this episode, we had a 9. Dad, did we get this right or wrong?
I think we actually have it a little low. This is the first time I've ever seen it a sugar mama. Usually it's the other way around, where it's the wealthy man with the much younger woman. And this really was way ahead of its time. So I have to give it the half a point up because I don't think I thought of that at the time we did the original show. But otherwise, there's nothing that's a problem with this. I didn't find anything that was really per se that was not classic. I think this is a classic film. And the only reason I don't give it a 10 completely is, boy, I don't even know. Tell me why I should not give it a 10. I'll leave it to the two of you.
Okay. Well, first off, one of the reasons that you could take a big half point or maybe even a full point off is did anyone apply for permits to bury the monkey in the yard?
Please. How many people have buried a pet in their yard without a permit?
A
Really?
gerbil, yes. A dog, well, now you're pushing it. But, a monkey, boy, if that gets into the drinking water.
Talking like a law student as opposed to a practicing lawyer who doesn't give a shit.
What I will say for this one in its favor of how we normally categorize this, starting at our normal baseline starting point of 6, because it's easier to take points off than there is to add points usually back on. I don't find anything to subtract from this, so I don't think you can have it less than a 6. But given the film's age, I would normally add in a couple of additional classicness points or timelessness points for that. So now I'm working off of a baseline of 8. You talk about the universality of the themes that are behind this. I would say it's possibly an easy 9. Now you throw in your additional factor. I'm willing to give it a 10 based on that. So you check my math. Is that enough for you, or do you need Frank to also weigh in?
Well, I want to hear Frank's opinion before I say I agree with the 10.
Well, I do have a question first. As far as classicness goes, you referred at one point to anything that may not have aged well, if I'm not mistaken? Or
Yes,
correct.
Okay. If I would have to subtract one thing, I will say that the dialogue pertaining to Norma's attempt in her own life has not aged very well in terms of the comments that he makes to her as a result. When he goes back to her, when he's at the New Year's Eve party, he's told that she has made an attempt. He does leave the party and rushes to her side. Things that he says to her, both then and at the end of the movie, when he is packing, saying, I'm going back to Ohio, and she threatens to do it again as a manipulation tactic in his response. I do cringe a little at how he refers to the concept of self-harm. He calls it silly. Why would you do a silly thing like that and be sensible? And I just, some of that just doesn't necessarily jive these days. However, I'm not saying that it should have been taken out of the story. I'm just referring simply to the specific words that were in the script that he was given to say that might not land so well these days. But honestly, again, I think that that's being a little nitpicky. There is so much about this film that makes it a classic in terms of how it just, no film like this had really ever been made before. And I just find that to be something that is very, in a good way, very brazen, very audacious, very, very much so Billy Wilder. I have a story, concept, I'm bringing it to the screen. He had his resistors. He was told that he was, quote, you should be tarred and feathered and run out of Hollywood, end quote. I believe that was Louis B. Mayer who said that to him.
Well, look at the source.
Exactly. So I would give it a 9.5 because there's so much about this film that is just so much to love about it.
Taking that into effect, and I think I hadn't considered some of the ways, but now that you mention it, there were some difficult moments, particularly with mental health, and Dad and I work with people with mental health challenges on a daily basis. Some of that doesn't sit well or age well, especially with their focus now in the modern era, especially in the last 10 to 15 years on mental health. I also don't care for some of the enabling of the people around her for her mental health and the way she's emotionally and mentally manipulative at times as well. But I mean, who isn't in this movie, frankly? And I think some of that could also sit wrong. So I'm fine on a 9.5.
Okay.
So that's still a half point improvement from our original score. So we've moved up on 4 different scores to this point. But now we get to rewatchability. Now, this is the most subjective score that we have. And because of that, this season, I've taken more of a tact of trying to go for the more objective score, trying to assess a wider variety of the audience as opposed to what I might personally feel is its rewatchability. I think that, again, black and white films are a little bit hard to sell to a more casual fan. Even people who really like movies, they are not always enamored with some of the classics. Even something as name recognizable as this may be a little bit tougher sell. I know not everybody necessarily agrees with that, but I just have a feeling that there are certain people that if you give them the choice between watching a color movie in the 70s or a black and white movie in the 50s, they will choose the color movie from the 70s every day of the week and twice on Sunday. That's just who they are. I don't know what it is about black and white. Even some modern black and white films can look fantastic, and I guess I just don't understand the discrimination against color, but objectively, I have to factor that in. I think this is, to Frank's point earlier, also paced a little bit slowly for the average public. It is about a lot of really kind of dark, heady themes. I think that's one of the reasons that this is much more critically appealing than publicly appealing, is that it's not a surface level movie. There's a lot to kind of dig and uncover underneath. It's not like it's buried deep. There are some films that you have to really extract some stuff from. This isn't necessarily one of those, but it's also not something where you get it if you're just looking for the surface level story. So from that standpoint, and throwing in that I think there will be some common interest among people just based on a name recognition, that there will be people more that will try this, I'm going to go with a 6.5 as the objective score.
It is difficult to remove the subjective and to look at it objectively. And I agree with the points that you made. Black and white is a tough sell. And I can tell you that as a high school English and film studies teacher. Black and white tends to be, they see black and white, so many, and then it's just it's like an instinctive shutdown. I don't know why. I can't explain why. I think that black and white is visually, I think people just associate that with something that is either gloomy, glum, depressing, or they automatically in their heads associate it with, this is old. This is old, so it's going to be boring. This is old, so it's not going to be anything that I can relate to. This is old, so it's going to be something that my parents, my grandparents would watch. It's an older person's movie. And I think that tends to be the instinctive go-to. Now, that, of course, tears at my soul, film lover that I am, because there are so many great black and white movies. As you said, black and white movies made today. 20 years ago, George Clooney's Good Night and Good Luck. 2011's Best Picture Oscar winner, The Artist. 2013, Nebraska with Bruce Dern.
Half of Oppenheimer is in black and white.
Oppenheimer, yeah, another Best Picture winner. So I think that black and white offers a lot of visual appeal for those who care to really appreciate the layers that it offers. For cinematographers, camera operators, really working hard to position things just so that you have a stark contrast between the bright light and the shadow. You can't get that effect in color. And I just think that black and white in so many ways, in my opinion anyway, is better than color. Now, I'm a cinephile. I'm not the average, as you said, the general movie-going public. I would agree that black and white is a tough sell because, as I said, they see it, and I think it's just an automatic association. So, looking at it objectively, I would give it a 7.
I agree with Frank. I'm at a 7 also. This is a film that I will, if I'm sitting and watching with people who may like films but are not big film people, will encourage them to watch. I will kind of almost push people to watch. So this is not just something that's going to be on my radar as far as rewatching, but it's going to include trying to convince other people to watch the film. So I'm at a 7 for those reasons.
All right. So since normally we don't try to, given the subjectivity of rewatchability, negotiate this score, we will average it out to a 6.83. Now, for audience score, originally on this one, we had an 89% for Google users and a 95% for Rotten Tomato users for a 9.2. Unfortunately, both of the scores have somewhat declined in the 4 years since we've done this. We have an 82% now for Google users and a 92% for Rotten Tomato users, giving us an 8.7, which may be one of the largest declines that we've had in audience score. So to repeat the categories, we moved in legacy from a 7.25 to a 9. We moved from a 6.75 to an 8.5 in impact and significance. We stayed at a 10 for novelty. We moved from a 9 to a 9.5 in classicness. We moved from a 6.25 to a 6.83 in rewatchability. And we moved a half step down in audience score from a 9.2 to an 8.7. So, given that we had moved up 5 categories out of 6, and the original score on this one was a 48.45, it would almost certainly have to have moved higher on the list. But did either of you want to take a guess before we get to a final score?
34.
Okay. Frank?
I teach English, not math, so I'm trying to process all these numbers because I just cannot calculate in my head. I'll go with the 34 as well.
Okay. Our new final total will be 52.53, and currently tying it on the list at number 24 with The Return of the Jedi, between The Matrix and A Few Good Men.
Okay, so I was even 10 under. All right, I'm good.
Interesting placement.
So,
I like that.
As always, if you have any questions, queries, comments, difficult subject matter, mental health challenges that you'd like to report to us, you can write us at greatestaltimemoviepodcast@gmail.com. You can find us on any of our socials at gmodepodcast, or you can find us on the show's website, ronnieduncanstudios.com/gmodepodcast. Let's move to some quick remaining questions on this one. We asked several remaining questions early on in our original episode, so I will leave those there, such as I know one of them was why Norma doesn't shoot herself, but shoots Joe instead. So if you want our answers on that, you can go back to the original episode on that one. Normally, I don't encourage people to go back to listen to some of our original episodes, but this was season 2, so it can't be that bad. We'd kind of improved by then. Maybe.
Season 1, no, don't listen.
We were still figuring out the show. Regardless, any remaining questions for either of you quickly before we go?
Not for me.
I just have one.
Okay.
If you had to decide, would you have given the Oscar to Gloria Swanson or Bette Davis?
The problem for me is that it really is a double lead in Anne Baxter and Bette Davis. And so if you're separating it out, boy, especially given that Betty, and I don't want to do this, but Betty had won multiple Oscars prior to this, I'd probably go with Swanson.
I think it's Swanson. She had to carry a much higher load. It was divided up between Davis and Baxter much more.
All right. We, of course, want to thank our brilliant guest, Frank, for being with us yet another time. You will be back with us again in 2 weeks to discuss what I think is one of the most underrated Best Picture winners in Ordinary People. But before we get to that, remind us again what you're working on and where people can find you.
Thank you again. I am continuing with my podcast, Reels of Cinema. I have a number of episodes planned out. I'll be doing a 60th anniversary, for example, of The Sound of Music. My next episode will be Back to School and Life of the Patty. I will also be re-editing and re-releasing some of my previous Silver Screeners episodes, and the ones where I had guests on, and calling them reruns, basically. So, waste not, want not. And I can be found on Facebook, Reels of Cinema Facebook group. Please feel free to join, spread the word, the more the merrier. X Twitter at FilmBuff1974, Instagram and Threads at FrankMandosa1974. You can email me at reelsofcinemapod@gmail.com.
Excellent. Dad, any quick remaining thoughts for the week?
Nope, I'm on vacation, so I don't have a lot of thoughts going through my head.
I know you are finishing up your prep for 1982, which we will be recording shortly for the month of October. So it will be a time between when you're probably hearing this and us recording to when it actually comes out, because Andrew does this once a month release schedule for most of his main episodes, even though somehow he's seemingly got more content than we do anymore these days, with how many different industry interviews and draft episodes and other random stuff he's got going on. I don't know how he keeps it all straight, but that's not for me to worry about. That's on him and his family, which,
yes,
I'm surprised if he sees them anymore. Regardless, all I will say is I have 2 movies left for 1982. I'm halfway through one of them. I am more than halfway through the other. Das Boot, decent movie, too damn long. I can finish 2 watchings of Rocky 3 within 1 watching of Das Boot. That's too long. So
Fair enough.
Those are actually the 2 movies that I have remaining. I saved Rocky 3, which I've seen many, many, many times, for my reward at the end of this journey. But those are my last 2 films, and I think I have like 25 or 26 by the time I get through those. But otherwise, that'll do it for us this week. Thank you for listening. If you think Mick Jagger will still be out there trying to be a rock star at age 50, you are sadly, sadly mistaken. Next week, for our 278th episode, we welcome back Jesse Sertle of Cinema Madison to discuss Almost Famous from 2000, celebrating its 25th anniversary. Written and directed by Cameron Crowe, cinematography by John Toll, music by Nancy Wilson, starring Patrick Fugit, Billy Crudup, Frances McDormand, Kate Hudson, Jason Lee, Anna Paquin, and Philip Seymour Hoffman. You won't want to miss that one, so watch ahead of the show by searching the Real Good app to find where it's streaming for you. That's REELGOOD. Please like, follow, rate, and review, or whatever on whichever platform you have so that more can join in our fun. You can also email the show at RonnieDuncanStudios.com/GMOTPodcast or at GreatestAllTimeMoviePodcast@gmail.com, or find us on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, Letterboxd, TikTok, or Blue Sky at the handle @GMOTPodcast. The Greatest Movie of All Time is a production of Ronnie Duncan Studios. Our show is mixed, edited, and written by Thomas Duncan. Our music is thanks to Purple Planet Music. Our distributor is Captivate FM. Our technical provider is Riverside FM.